My name is Clarissa Vance, and I've learned to keep my power quiet. It was a warm Sunday evening when my sister threw her engagement dinner at our parents' house. Everyone was there: uncles, cousins, childhood neighbors who still thought they had a front row seat to my life. The table was crowded, laughter echoing off the walls, wine flowing freely. But I could always feel the way their eyes landed on me, like I didn't quite belong. "You still driving that little gray thing?" someone asked, loud enough for a few to chuckle. My sister gave me a look that was all faux concern. "She's just, practical. Clarissa's always been good at making things stretch." Her fiancé laughed politely. He didn't know the undertone, but I did. Everyone did. I smiled and took a sip of my water. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. And then, just as the plates were being cleared, her fiancé leaned across the table, casual as can be, and asked, "Hey, Clarissa, this is random, but do you have anything to do with a jet I saw in St. Bart's last weekend?" Said something like Vance Capital on it. The room went silent. Forks stopped moving. And I just said, with a small smile, "Yeah, that's me." It had been like that for years. Every family gathering was the same. The cheerful questions that weren't really questions. The veiled comments dressed up as concern. They saw me as the odd one out. The daughter who never settled down, who didn't live in the same zip code, who didn't bring a date, who never posted baby shower photos or beach vacations on Facebook. At first, I tried harder. I sent gifts, remembered birthdays, volunteered to pay for dinner sometimes, thinking maybe it would shift the tone. But somehow it only made things worse. One year, I offered to help with my niece's school tuition. My sister told everyone I was trying to buy her approval. After that, I stopped offering. I moved to Seattle when I was 22 and rarely looked back. They called it running away. I called it breathing. For the first few years, I struggled, bounced between jobs, rented a basement room with no windows, and ate a lot of rice and eggs. I started a side project, just a simple software tool for independent couriers to manage deliveries better. It didn't even have a name at first. I coded at night, worked customer support during the day, and burned out more than once. But 3 years later, a logistics firm in Singapore found the product, reached out, and asked if I'd ever considered scaling it. I hadn't, but I did. With a little help and a lot of caffeine, I built it out. The company grew. A seed round came, then a Series A. By the time I was 35, I had a full staff, a headquarters, international clients, and a non-disclosure clause on a sale that made me more money than my parents had ever dreamed of. I kept the old car. I didn't need a new one. I liked how quiet it kept things. But to my family, none of that mattered. All they saw was what I didn't talk about. I didn't wear luxury brands. I didn't brag. I didn't explain where I flew when I left town on holidays. And so they filled in the blanks with what they wanted to believe. "She's always been independent," my mother would say at dinners, with a tight smile. "Didn't want a husband or a home." My aunt once leaned over during Thanksgiving and whispered, "At least your sister turned out normal." At first it hurt. Then it amused me. And now it was just a wall of static I tuned out completely. They thought I was poor because I didn't flaunt wealth the way they understood it, because I didn't need their approval to feel successful, because I didn't beg for a seat at a table they'd built on shallow foundations. Still, I showed up that night, not for them, for me. I had my reasons. And watching their faces freeze at the mention of that jet, it was never part of the plan. But I won't lie, it was satisfying. There was a time I thought I could earn my way back into their good graces. I used to believe that love, at least in families, could be negotiated. That if I worked hard enough, gave enough, proved myself enough, they'd look at me differently, maybe even see me. When I was 28, I ended up in the hospital with a ruptured appendix that turned septic. I was in recovery for weeks. Not one phone call, not one card. My roommate at the time, a guy I barely knew from Craigslist, brought me soup and helped me shower. My own mother didn't even know I'd almost died. Or maybe she did, and figured it wasn't her problem. That was the last time I expected anything from them. I stopped sending holiday texts. I let birthdays pass. I pulled away slowly, so quietly they barely noticed. Or maybe they did, and were just too proud to say anything. But cutting them out emotionally didn't mean cutting them off entirely. I still showed up for big events. I still brought thoughtful gifts. I still played the role of eccentric older sister because it was easier than explaining why I kept my distance. And because some part of me still hoped, despite everything, that something would shift. That maybe, one day, they'd ask what I was working on with genuine curiosity. That they'd see me not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who carved out her own path and survived. It never happened. When my business took off, I didn't tell them. Not when I hired my first employee. Not when we hit $2 million in recurring revenue. Not even when I signed the acquisition deal that paid me out enough to retire twice over. What would have been the point? They wouldn't have believed me, or worse, they would have found a way to twist it. My mother would have said I was bragging. My sister would have told people I was making it all up. I learned to keep my victories private. I poured the money into a new venture, one I didn't name after myself, on purpose. Something sustainable. Something that let me create jobs. I stayed out of the spotlight. I flew coach even when I didn't have to. My team knew who I was. My partners respected me. That was enough. But it wasn't just the money that changed. It was me. I no longer needed to convince anyone of my worth. I didn't carry the ache of not being invited to the inner circle. I had built my own table. Quietly, steadily, piece by piece. Still, there was a certain irony in the fact that after all the years I'd spent shrinking myself to avoid judgment, the truth was about to fall into their laps over dessert, delivered not by me, but by the man my sister was about to marry. And I knew, just knew, that she would hate that. Because in her world, there was only room for one success story. And she had already claimed that title, complete with the diamond ring, the planned honeymoon, the matching luggage set she couldn't stop showing off on Instagram. I didn't come that night to disrupt anything. I truly didn't. But when life hands you a moment like that, you don't flinch, you hold your glass steady, you smile, and you let the truth sit there on the table, sparkling and undeniable. The evening had been set up to be picture perfect. White string lights twinkled along the backyard fence. The long dining table was dressed in navy linens and gold cutlery. "Classy," my sister had said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A private chef was hired. Servers in black moved like shadows between courses, and soft jazz floated from hidden speakers. It was her moment, and she had curated it down to the minute. I arrived 20 minutes late on purpose. Not to make a scene, just enough to avoid the tight smiles and obligatory small talk. I parked a block away, walked the last stretch in heels that didn't belong to any label, and slipped in through the side gate with all the confidence of someone used to being underestimated. Mom met me at the patio doors, her voice sticky sweet. "Clarissa, we weren't sure you'd show." Which was code for, "We hoped you wouldn't." My sister floated over seconds later, dressed like a walking engagement shoot. Champagne silk, a glittering ring, and that same familiar gleam in her eye when she saw me. "You look cozy," she said, scanning my black sheath dress with a tight-lipped grin. "You've always had such simple taste." Simple, practical, frugal. Every word she used to describe me was a euphemism for small. I just smiled. "Good to see you too." The table was already full of chatter. Congrats for my niece who'd landed an internship at a PR firm. Praise for my cousin's boyfriend who'd been promoted at Chase. I nodded when people looked my way, but no one asked what I'd been up to. No one ever did. It had been decided long ago that I wasn't part of the success narrative. I was the quirky one, the lone wolf, the woman who chose freedom because clearly she couldn't land a husband. I sipped my water and let them talk over me. Sometimes that was easier than trying to swim upstream. By the third course, the comments started to shift. Uncle Jeff leaned over and chuckled. "Still driving that old Honda? I swear that thing's got more miles than your father's lawnmower." Laughter. Not cruel, just familiar, comfortable in its condescension. Someone else added, "Clarissa always did love her bargain bins. Remember those DIY Christmas gifts? Who makes hand soap from scratch?" "Honestly," my sister chimed in with a performative sigh, "she stayed so grounded. You know, never let the pressure of success get to her." She turned to her fiancé. She's never cared much for appearances. I looked across the table at her, straight through that perfect smile. She was trying to impress him by putting me down. And he was playing along, or so I thought. Then he turned to me with a curious tilt of the head. Wait, Clarissa Vance? His brow furrowed slightly. Vance Capital? My sister blinked. What? I saw your name on a jet last weekend, he continued. We were scouting honeymoon venues in St. Bart's, and there was this Gulfstream G600 on the tarmac. The concierge mentioned the owner was based in Seattle. I figured it was a coincidence. You could feel the air shift. Forks hovered mid-air. Wine glasses froze mid-sip. I looked up slowly, met his gaze, and said with calm precision, That's me. A single beat, then another. My cousin's jaw dropped. My mother's eyes narrowed, like she was trying to recalculate everything she thought she knew. My sister went pale, visibly pale, and her fiancé just blinked, lips parting as if to say more but not quite finding the words. He finally managed, Wait, you're the one who closed that deal with Eastern Freight last year? That was a huge merger. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The truth was already echoing louder than anything I could say. My sister laughed awkwardly. She's kidding. Then quieter. Right? I stood up slowly, napkin folded and placed neatly on the plate. Actually, I have an early flight. I should get going. But dessert's not even out yet, my mother said, too fast. I know. I could feel every eye on me as I walked around the table. People who had spent years not asking, not listening, suddenly desperate to reframe me in a new context. But I wasn't there to help them catch up. As I reached the gate, I heard someone whisper, She has a jet? No one followed, and I didn't look back. The walk to my car felt longer than usual. Maybe it was the silence still hanging behind me, like smoke. Maybe it was the sudden weightlessness in my chest, like I'd just set something heavy down for the last time. I slid into the driver's seat, shut the door, and sat there for a moment, with my hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. The porch lights were still glowing behind me. Inside that house, my sister was probably trying to spin a new narrative, one that explained everything away. Maybe I'd won the lottery. Maybe I was a silent partner. Maybe it was all exaggerated. Anything that let her stay the main character in the family story. But this time, the story had shifted, and she wasn't the one holding the pen. The truth was, I didn't care if they believed it or not. I wasn't looking for validation anymore. But it hit differently, because it hadn't come from me. It had come from someone they wanted to believe, someone they respected, someone they were still trying to impress. That, somehow, made it real in a way I never could. For once, they had to reckon with who I actually was, not who they had decided I would always be. I didn't need the moment. I hadn't planned it. But it arrived like a tide, steady and unstoppable. I drove home in silence, windows down, night air cool against my face. There was a freedom in not needing to explain yourself, a peace in no longer shrinking to fit a room that was never built for you in the first place. Later that night, around midnight, I got a message. It was from my sister's fiancé. Sorry if that was awkward tonight. Didn't mean to put you on the spot. Just respect what you've done, a lot. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. Thanks. I'm used to awkward. That was just clarity. He read it instantly, left it at a thumbs up. That was enough. I lay in bed, the ceiling above me a quiet canvas. Memories painted themselves without permission. I thought of being 12, sitting on the back porch steps while my sister opened presents inside for her birthday party. One I wasn't allowed to attend because it was for her friends only. I'd helped Mom make the cake, but no one saved me a slice. I thought of a prom night, watching from the window as my cousin took pictures in the front yard, laughing with our relatives. I hadn't been invited. No one asked if I had a dress. I thought of my father, now long gone, who used to ruffle my hair and say, "She's the practical one. The other one's the pretty one." Small words, small cuts over years, until you bleed from places no one sees. The next morning, I got a text from my mother, short, clipped. Why didn't you ever tell us about your business? I didn't answer, not out of spite, but because that question wasn't really about curiosity. It was about control. It was about rewriting history, so they wouldn't have to admit how easily they'd dismissed me all those years. My silence was the only honest reply. By noon, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in over a year sent me a cheerful message about grabbing coffee and catching up. Then another. Suddenly, I was interesting. Suddenly, I had value. But I'd waited too long for those invitations. They didn't mean anything anymore. They weren't about knowing me. They were about proximity to a story that had changed shape. I declined politely every time. No anger, just clarity. 2 days later, my assistant confirmed the St. Bart's jet had been prepped for a new charter. I booked a last-minute seat on it, not because I wanted to escape, but because I'd earned the right to leave things behind. I sat in the cabin, glass of mineral water in hand, looking out over the endless stretch of ocean. The sun hit the wing just right, a clean line of light cutting through the clouds. And I smiled, not because I was flying private, but because I was flying free. Not everything needs to be a confrontation. Sometimes the most powerful move is to not explain yourself, to walk away from the stage mid-performance and let the audience sit with their silence. For years, I thought my only worth came from proving them wrong. Now I know better. My worth isn't built on their recognition. It never was. It lives in every line of code I wrote in a dark apartment when no one believed in me. It lives in every team I built, every decision I made, every risk I took when failure felt like the only certainty. It lives in how I chose not to become bitter, even when they gave me every reason to be. It lives in the quiet, in the calm, in me. I used to think closure meant having the last word. That maybe if I just explained myself well enough, if I laid out all the facts, they'd finally see me. They'd understand. But closure isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a quiet plane ride away from people who never really looked past the story they wrote for you. It's the sound of the door closing behind you. Not slammed, not dramatic. Just final, clean. My family still talks. I know they do. They rewrite the narrative, turn me into a mystery, maybe even a villain. Maybe I changed. Maybe I got cold. Maybe I forgot where I came from. Let them. Because I no longer live in their version of me. I've outgrown it. I don't need to be understood by people who were never curious. I don't need applause from a table I was never truly welcomed at. I don't need someone to say, "We were wrong about you." I already know they were. What I needed, what I fought so long to find, was peace. And I found it the moment I stopped trying to shrink myself into something they could recognize. They'll keep speculating. They'll keep talking. But I don't have to answer. I live in rooms they'll never enter. I build things they'll never see. I make choices without their echo in my ears. And that, in its own quiet way, is power. Sometimes the most radical act of healing isn't revenge or confrontation. It's simply living fully, on your terms, and letting them sit with what they missed. I didn't walk into that dinner to prove anything, but they saw it anyway. Not because I demanded it, because truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs a moment. And when it comes, you don't flinch. You don't perform. You just stand still, exactly as you are, and let the silence do the rest.